Welcome to
Okay.
the Start Network Assembly. We're delighted that you are joining us and really excited to be starting the assembly off with a Learn session focused on the Global Start Fund and a look at how the fund is making progress in enabling more locally led humanitarian action. The Start Network's vision is for a locally led humanitarian system that is accountable to people affected by and at risk of crisis. One of the ways in which we expect to achieve this vision is by making system-level shifts in the way that humanitarian aid is delivered through innovative approaches to financing. The Global Start Fund is the Start Network's flagship program and a financing mechanism that is uniquely poised to address many of the challenges in the global system. While the Global Start Fund has always been central to the network's vision for change and has long championed the role of local and national NGOs in humanitarian response, we recognize that there is a lot for a global financing mechanism to learn when it comes to best enabling locally led action. This session will center the role of national and local non-governmental organizations and the power that they are able to hold in influencing decision-making and in leading humanitarian action through the Global Start Fund. As context, the Start Fund offers rapid, effective financing and focuses on 3 types of humanitarian need: underfunded small to medium scale crises, forecasts of impending crises, and spikes in chronic humanitarian crises. To date, the Global Start Fund has reached more than 21 million people, dispersing over 90 million British pounds to Start Network member organizations. And since 2014, the fund has responded in around 70 low and middle income countries to some 400 humanitarian crises, ranging from conflict and displacement to flooding, earthquakes, and disease outbreaks. It is important to note the unique timeframes within which the Start Fund operates. Funding is released quickly, within 72 hours of a member organization raising a crisis alert, and projects aim to reach people affected by crises within 7 days. The projects themselves conclude within 45 days. It's also important to note that the maximum amount that can be requested by any member organization in their Start Fund project proposal is 300,000 British pounds. The governance and decision-making of the Start Fund are significant in that they are member-led and they harness the capacity and expertise that we have across the network. There are 2 main decision-making points within the Start Fund alert cycle. Allocation decisions are taken at the global level, and they determine whether a crisis fits the aim of the Start Fund. If activated, they also decide how much money should be allocated to that crisis. And when the Start Fund is activated, a project selection decision-making process taken by members and partner staff closest to the location of the crisis concludes the process of award. In early 2020, Start Network launched a decision-making review with the aim of more power being held closest to where crises happen and ensuring that decision-making processes are equitable and fit for the purpose of a scaled Start Fund. Several Start Network member agency representatives worked together to generate new ideas for how decision-making could be designed and develop those concepts into prototypes. These were subsequently trialed and successful changes have now been put into practice. The review concluded just last month. And examples of some of the changes that were introduced through this review are at allocation stage, Start Network member organizations are asked now to include more regional colleagues in Start Fund allocation rotas. This is resulting in greater diversity among decision makers and increased contextual knowledge in decision making. There is a challenge with the availability of regional advocates within the network and also with the time that decisions are scheduled at, given that the Global Start Fund operates primarily out of the United Kingdom. Secondly, we introduced representatives from the alerting countries into the allocation decision-making meetings. This has resulted in greater comprehension of the situation, owing to the presence of the representatives who were able to provide updated information on the crisis and answer questions from the allocation decision makers. At project selection stage, projects with local partner organizations have been encouraged further through the request for more information on partner roles in project proposals. This is expected to result in increased funding of projects that involve local partners and the promotion of collaboration between INGO and local and national NGOs. There is, however, challenges with some organizations still not including partner information in their project proposals, and the change has not been implemented for long enough for us to really discern the actual results of this change. The START Network's vision is very much for a locally led humanitarian system that is accountable to people affected by and at risk of crisis. The role of local and national NGOs in humanitarian assistance is increasingly recognized. However, the power to act is often constrained by limited access to funding. In 2020, the Global START Fund dispersed just under 16.4 million in funding to humanitarian crises. 26% of this amount, around 4.3 million, was dispersed to local and national NGOs, both indirectly and directly. To date, in 2021, the Global START Fund has dispersed 10.8 million to crises. Of this amount, 2.5 million, or 23.5% of total disbursements, has been awarded indirectly, and just under 60,000, or 0.5% of total disbursements, has been funded directly to local and national NGOs. The 2021 figures to date include the direct and indirect funding to local and national NGOs amounting to just over 24%. The actual amount will differ, as some reports have yet to be received at this point in time. While many INGOs within the START network have progressed approaches to partnership and collaboration with local and national NGOs, we do recognize that there's an important role for START to play in increasing direct funding to local organizations. However, we recognize that many local and national NGOs are constrained by our sector's approach to risk and compliance. One way in which we're challenging this is through the introduction of the tiered due diligence framework that we spoke about at length in the last START Network Assembly. This tiered due diligence framework is one in which organizations are placed on different tiers rather than assigned passes and fails. Using a tiered approach, we hope to unlock funding for more organizations, particularly local and national organizations, to both evidence their humanitarian impact and to challenge assumptions on risk. At START, we assess members through the framework to determine the tier that they will initially be placed on and the corresponding access to funding. Members placed on tier 2 of 4 have been assessed to have internal procedures to mitigate risks across the 9 streams you see on the left-hand side of the screen, and to meet the requirements to access a certain level of funding. In mid-2020, a START Fund pilot was launched to accelerate locally led humanitarian action. The pilot very much focused on enabling access to funds for 10 member organizations that were placed on tier 2 at that time, and those organizations were operational across 3 countries. The START Network member organization, AFIDEM, was just awarded START funding for the 2nd time this year. We are joined by Deo Pondu Maheshe from the organization, who will speak to us about some of the organization's experience in accessing START funding. Deo, over to you.
Thank you, Lucrezia. This is Deo Pondu Maheshe. I am from AFIDEM NGO. As Lucrezia said, AFIDEM is a national NGO acting in the East Party of Congo, and it's experienced in disaster response and emergencies. And soon we intervene in Goma with a response about the volcanic eruption. And it was for 400 people who was identified to benefit from that response. Our response in Goma was essentially made for NFIs, and the step of this response was to first discuss with the community affected and the local authorities and leaders in Nyiragongo, in Goma. You can hear me, I think.
Deo, we can hear you. And if you turn on your video, we can see you also.
Oh, thank you. So our response was for 400 people were identified in Nyiragongo. And after they identified, we do our best to involve local authorities and leaders on the sites who helped to distribute the NFIs. I can say that in Goma was not so easy for AFEDEM because of mainly two big challenges. The first challenge for AFEDEM was the ability for them to respond to a large need of the vulnerable due to its limited capacity in terms of its level. As it's known, AFEDEM is a tier member, and we can't go to 30,000 pounds. With this response, we just do the minimum that was possible to do. The second challenge is about our first focus of zone that we need to attend. Firstly, it was necessary to go to Sake, but after an analysis, it was found that people who were in Sake was doing what is possible to return in Goma. So initially the proposal was designed for an intervention in Sake, but at more than 50 kilometers from Goma. But due to a massive return movement of affected patients, we had to reach the victim in Nyiragongo. And that's what we did. So we reached the victim who were returned in Nyiragongo, and we distributed the NFI there. In terms of conclusion, we can say that this first experience with the STAT fund was successful for AFEDEM, but a bit difficult, as I mentioned, due to the two main challenges. The suggestion that we can give here is that, if possible, STAT funds can review the level of national NGOs who are on the ground and actually member of STAT network. A second suggestion is about how it may be possible when people are in a returning movements. It may be possible to wait or to take a moment to be sure that population has established a stability before the intervention. The third suggestion is to see if it may be possible to reinforce coordination on the ground. And this suggestion is mainly for the NGO that are acting in the hub. It seems that coordination it remains a bit weak among members in the hub. The last point for me was to share with you my video, but I don't think if it will be possible because I sent a video to Lucrecia, but she said that she couldn't open the file that I sent. So I don't know if there is another solution to that, but I think my presentation is finished there. Yes.
Thank you, Deo. Perhaps just to share with anyone that's listening to this session, you can post questions that we can take directly back to Deo, or we can try to answer as a group towards the end of the session. So please do put any questions or comments you might have into the chat box, and we'll try to respond to those towards the end of the session. Great. So, sorry, just bear with me a moment. Thank you, Deo. So as we heard, so Deo is joining us from AFADEM, and we're very grateful that he was able to call in today despite some connectivity challenges that we've been having, to share some of their experiences in managing Start Fund awards over the past year. I should also add that the pilot to accelerate locally led humanitarian action through the Start Fund was first launched in mid-2020. And we're currently in a phase where we're introducing some changes, which I'll speak to in just a moment. However, there has been a large emphasis on capturing learning from this experience through consultations with the organizations who have had access to the pilot, including those who have been awarded funding through Start Fund, and last year through Start Fund COVID-19. The learning in general has revealed that there are several barriers which local and smaller national NGOs face in accessing Start Fund funding. These include understanding the process, lack of opportunity with relatively few suitable crises in the countries of operations that could be raised to the Global Start Fund, some limited capacities in terms of writing competitive proposals and completing all of the various requirements for the existing Start Fund. And for some of the agencies concerned, the relatively small size of the direct grants available, which, as we just heard Deo mention. So until now, those accessing the pilot funding have been limited to 30,000 per project. And as I mentioned at the start of this session, other organizations within the network who have full access to funding are able to access up to 300,000. So quite a considerable difference in the value of the awards available. With the support of a number of our donors, we are able to continue this pilot now through to September of next year. We are also able to introduce a number of changes, which we're really pleased to announce today. So moving forwards, we are able to include all Start Network member organizations joining the network on Tier 2. And it's worthwhile noting that while an organization may initially be assessed at being on Tier 2, there is an expectation that there will be movement between the tiers, and many organizations will ultimately be able to access the full suite of funding through the various Start Network programs. There is also a change in that we are increasing the maximum size of awards available to organizations working through the pilot from 30,000 per award to 60,000. And we hope that this responds to some of the concerns that have been raised, that the existing £30,000 cap is a limiting factor and is prohibiting access. And finally, we're exploring a number of adaptations to start fund processes that might help to unlock funding for local and national NGOs across the growing START network. The first adaptation that we will explore is increasing the START fund project timeframe for local and national NGOs. This is an idea that some of you will be familiar with, as it has been trialed previously through other START fund mechanisms, notably the Migration Emergency Response Fund, and last year through START Fund COVID-19. It's been proposed through feedback from member organizations over a number of years now, and so it is something that we wish to understand a little better and to test over the coming year. A design workshop is planned for next week to advance our understanding of the challenges and to further develop an extended timeframe as a viable solution. In addition to those changes to the pilot that is being run through the Global START Fund, there are a number of other developments that are taking place in response to member feedback and our learning. We currently have a START Funds program team that is led by Serena Suen, who joined us as the START Fund program manager earlier this year. Serena is leading a START Fund program that includes a number of team members who are able to operate in multiple languages and better accommodate the needs of the growing membership. We also have reintroduced regional advisors to the START Fund. Dedicated regional capacity will assist START Network where membership growth is most expected. The two regional advisors who we are introducing are based out of Harare in Zimbabwe and out of Delhi in India. In addition to changes in the actual teaming structure, we are also introducing more systematic tracking of funding that is accessed by local and national NGO members, both directly and indirectly. There's already been a considerable amount of work invested in this over the past few years, so this isn't a completely new approach. START Fund training is also increasingly available in person and will soon be more available through e-learnings in English, French, and Spanish. Other languages will be looked at as the membership grows and we understand a little better what is required by organizations within it. Interpreters are also increasingly engaged in project selection meetings to increase access to decision-making. And START Fund templates, including alert note and proposal templates, have been translated from English into Spanish and French. Submission can now be made in all 3 languages. And finally, I just wanted to conclude by speaking a little bit to the evaluation that we're conducting for the Global Fund this year. As many of you know, we conduct evaluations for the START Fund on an annual basis. And this year, in line with our refresh strategy as START Network and our increased emphasis on enabling locally led humanitarian action, we will be looking at the role of the Global START Fund and specifically assessing the extent to which the Global Fund is ready to make the transition into a more locally led model while maintaining its mandate to respond rapidly to the gaps and unmet needs of people in or at risk of crisis. Unto this end, we have been working with a group of consultants who have asked us today to share a link to a survey with you all, which would request your feedback on a number of questions. Those questions are really looking at how we make the move towards a more locally led global fund structure. And we'll be sharing that in the chat box and asking if you're able to respond to that or share it with your teams to respond to that over the next couple of days so that we're able to share some feedback with you towards the end of the assembly. I'm now going to stop speaking and invite questions. So please do feel free to raise them in the comments box so that we can try to respond to as many of those as possible. Great. Dave, there's a question for you. You mentioned that due to the funding limit for AFADEM as a tier 2 organization, this meant that you had to amend what you would like to deliver in the response that you spoke about earlier. Do you think that the funding limitation affects the quality of responses in this case? What would be a more appropriate funding amount? Is there a way that START Network can better support local organizations?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yes, it's really a big challenge for members who are at this level 2, tier 2, and if it may be possible to go up to 100 pounds, maybe it will be possible to respond a bit more with efficiency and try to meet needs, immediate need of people affected in terms of health needs and also in terms of food as an emergency need on the ground. That's what I can say.
Thank you, Dave. Dave, are you able to tip your computer screen a little so we can see you fully?
Like that, it's okay?
I can just see the top of your head. It's a little bit. Yeah, that's better. Thank you. There was another question that we had, which I might share with you, Serena, if you wouldn't mind. So the question was that we spoke about funds being released within 72 hours of application if necessary. There is a process of tiered due diligence. How is it possible to release the fund within 72 hours? Should the member organizations have completed the due diligence processes prior to the release of the fund?
Thanks, Lucy. Yes, that's right. So the expectation is for our members to complete the due diligence before accessing START Fund, so that we can overcome that problem of making sure that we're able to disperse funding within 72 hours. Once agency have been put in a tier, and then through that tier diligence process, START Fund and other parts of START Network will also provide capacity strengthening and other services to make sure that that agency are able to deliver disaster response in a timely manner.
Okay.
Thank you, Serena. Vincent, a question has come in asking, the funding limit of the tier 2 member organizations is very limited and not able to meet the requirements of any disaster response. Has it increased or is it in the process of increasing? And Vincent, could you just introduce yourself also, because I haven't done so myself.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Lucy. Hi, everyone. I'm Vincent. I'm the due diligence platform manager for START Network and somewhat supporting the START Fund as well with the pilot of the tier 2 locally led action, humanitarian action pilot that we're running. Just to also add to what Serena was saying, so with the due diligence, our due diligence is actually valid for 3 years. So that's how we are able to have the system of that early releases as well, so that we could, the due diligence is done upon membership, and that then becomes refreshed every 3 years. So that's why if a member triggers, basically raises an alert, then they can they can immediately access funding because their due diligence is still valid within that period. So on the question, and we take the point that basically that the funding limit is really threshold is quite limiting really for tier 2 when we started the pilot, and it was a pilot and we had limited funding available in order to test the model. So we have now actually gotten back, and as maybe Lucy has mentioned, this has just been increased. So we have managed to secure approval from our donors that to be able to increase this amount now to 60,000, as what was actually what came out of the consultations with the different organizations involved. So our evidence and learning team gathered basically information from our members that are participating in the tier 2 in this pilot, and the feedback that we have received was that most organizations are looking at the proper amount to be within 50,000 to 100,000 range. And so we are testing right now with doubling the threshold to 60,000. So is this effective immediately from the announcement? Essentially, as Lucy has just given the announcement for any future alerts that gets raised by tier 2 members, right? Yes, and also just to note that basically the start fund niche is for small to medium scale disasters. And so we are still also like in the stage where we are still trying to balance what that means for tier 2, and hence the purpose of the pilot, to be able to make a determination of what that proper amount is supposed to be, right? So we hope you would bear with us while we are testing different models.
Thank you, Vincent. We have another question that's come in, which is asking about the funding limit of the tier 2 member organization. Sorry. Bear with me 1 minute, trying to find the right question. Sorry. So this one, David, but I might call upon you to speak to. Perhaps if you could introduce yourself and then just try to respond to the question, which is there a mechanism to track funding indirectly?
Hi, everyone. Yes, my name is David Burt, and I'm the manager of the Start Fund's MEAL team. There is a mechanism to track funding indirectly. Essentially, every time when a member organization submits a project report at the end of implementing a project, they will hopefully include whether or not they have subgranted funding to a partner. So we collect subgranted information as well, so we can track how much funding is going indirectly to different types of organizations. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Deo, one more has come through for you, please. So the volcanic eruption in Goma earlier this year affected thousands of people. How were you able to narrow the response to just 400 people affected by that crisis?
Okay, it's a good question. And mainly, as I said in my presentation, we do the best we can to involve local authorities and leaders. As local authorities and leaders were involved, one of the important criteria was first to look for those who lost their house and they lost all of the how can I say, all of the materials, as I can say it. And that was the first criteria. The second criteria was to do the best. So we identify the most vulnerable families and people, families who were in a very difficult condition and out of their area of living. That was the two main criteria that guide us to choose the 400 people. But we can't say that the 400 people was the max, the limit was the limit of those who were seriously affected. But we choose the most vulnerable among the affected people, with the involvement of local authorities and local leaders. Yeah.
Thank you, Deo. Another question for you, please, Vincent, if you're happy to take this. And the question is, sorry, can any national NGOs apply to go through due diligence so that they can access the funds, or are there criteria? And this question comes from Tim Boyce Watson.
Thanks, Tim. So essentially, access to the funds to START Network programs would require that you are a member of START Network in most regards, unless it's you're a program partner. So in this instance, access to the START Fund in particular requires membership into the network. And so that would mean that, yeah, organizations would have gone through our due diligence for membership into the network, and they would then have access to the START Fund program. So it is very possible for local and national organizations to go through the due diligence process. And that's also what we are piloting, what we're testing at the moment, which is the tiered due diligence framework. And that is obviously something that we are trying to bring more to the forefront within START Network when it comes to bringing in new members, to be able to bring in a lot more local and national organizations into the fold. So, and I think within the network right now, there's still, the percentage of local and national organizations isn't as high, so we don't have, let's say, a 50% let's say breakdown of like local and national organizations versus our INGO membership, for example. But we are, we are working toward bringing in more and more local and national organizations, primarily through our hub infrastructure. Yeah, so that it is something that we are doing at the moment, but hopefully throughout, this will increase as we build more hubs.
Thank you, Vincent. There's also a question relating to our work in disaster risk financing. So the risk financing aspect of START financing. And the question is, enhancing the funding cap from 30,000 to 60,000 is welcomed. However, in some countries with functional risk financing systems, the 60,000 is, and I think it's suggesting that the 60,000 is still quite low to sustain a disaster risk financing response, particularly in protracted responses for hazards such as drought. And the person who submitted this question is suggesting that, it's not a question, but a recommendation that the cap could be lifted from 60,000 to 100,000, with a question of, is that possible? You've mentioned already, Vincent, but perhaps you could reply specifically to that point.
Yeah, so I think with the we are looking into the different funding caps, right? And actually the way that the tiered model works is that we don't, because it's a risk-based model, the funding caps for different programs will be based on that assessment, on the assessment of that program, and the determination of that program. So actually, in this instance, though, the DRF, we are also testing within the DRF infrastructure, releasing funding directly to tier 2 to members in tier 2. The difference in the way that it's being rolled out in the DRF is that actually, if it's, for example, for protracted emergencies, you can have a 60,000 response for each 45-day duration of a response. So if it's a protracted emergency and it's let's say a 90-day response, you can get two 60,000 pound grants, one after the other. So that's how the DRF, how we're testing it in the DRF scenario. Obviously, we welcome other suggestions on how this can also be further, improved, and it is possible in the future that we can lift the cap up to 100,000. This is something that we can look at further.
Thank you, Vincent. We have another question. Although we are talking about the initial 72 hours, it takes around 13 days to reach the first beneficiaries. Pooled funding can help a lot for immediate response because the first 24 hours is critical. Does the START network have any plans for pooled funds in this regard? And perhaps I can respond to that one. So the Global START Fund is a pooled funding mechanism with multiple donors that contribute to it. And it operates within the timeframes we laid out at the start of the presentation. So funds are released within 72 hours. Communities affected by crisis, we aim to reach through member projects within 7 days. And then those projects conclude within 45 days. What I would just say is that we have been working with a number of local start funds. So we have Start Fund Bangladesh and we have Start Fund Nepal, which launched just this year. There's a session at 9:30 a.m. UK time, which is around 50 minutes from now, where we will hear a little bit more from the team and member representatives working on the local funds. And I would encourage people to join that session. We do have some really interesting evidence, particularly from Start Fund Bangladesh, which has been in operation since 2017, whereby Start Fund Bangladesh activations do allow for even quicker disbursement of funding and enable local organizations in Bangladesh to commence their project activities really remarkably fast. So I would encourage you to listen into that session about local start funds. We just have 5 minutes remaining. We have a few questions that have come through. Perhaps, David, there's one more about tracking of funding, specifically around whether we map subgrant, so the subgranting of Start Fund awards. Would you be able to speak to that point, please?
Yes, thanks, Lucy. Yes, thank you for the question. So, if I've understood it correctly, when the agency that has implemented the project submits their final report, they will include additional expenditure about their partners' expenditure. Sorry, they'll include additional information about their partners' expenditure. So for each budget line, they will include their own expenditure and then that of their partners for as many partners as they have. So that is essentially how we track subgranted information.
Thank you, David. There's one more question about the different ceilings for member organizations placed on the various tiers of our due diligence framework. Vincent, would you be able to speak to that point, please?
Sure, and if it's Serena also could add if you wish. Currently we have tier 3 and 4 organizations, although we are phasing out the tier 4 element. That's another issue. But with tier 3, the maximum is with the program funding that that Start Fund has, which is at 300,000. Tier 2 is, as we've announced, at 60,000. And tier 1 does not have access to program funding, but has access to organizational strengthening and learning grants. So other more inward-facing grants, tier 1 has access to up to 10,000 per grant. Yeah.
Thank you, Vincent. So I think we've responded to most of the questions that we have received. If your question has not been responded to, we will try to follow up offline. So please do make sure that you log whatever questions you might have on the platform, and we will try to respond to those separately if we've not managed to get to you during this session. I think perhaps we will conclude the session there. And we'll just signpost you to the welcoming briefing, which will be the next session, followed by the local Start Fund Learn session, where we'll be hearing from colleagues working in Bangladesh and Nepal. So just to say thank you to everyone that joined us, and a particular thank you to Deo from AFADEM for dialing in and speaking to his organization's experience of working through the Start Fund. So thank you to everyone, and wishing you all a wonderful assembly. I hope you have a great next few days. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Lucrecia.